It's Ash from SuperVideos back for another video for The Last of Us on HBO. On this video, we're going to be taking a look at some pretty cool Easter eggs and callbacks in the latest episode that aired, Season 1, Episode 6, which was called Kin. A lot of these are actually directly connected to things from Part 2 of the video game. So there are Easter eggs and callbacks from Part 2, which is obviously going to be Season 2 of the TV show. There's some pretty interesting references to the ending of Part 2, and also some very interesting stuff when it comes to Joel's tactics, interrogating the people that he's trying to get information out of. So stay tuned, we'll be right back to break it all down. Alright, as always, before we dive into it, smash the like button, subscribe to join our community, and press the bell to be notified when I upload on the channel. With that said, let's dive right into it. So first, I want to talk about this pretty cool scene where we had Joel and Ellie talking to the elderly that they met. Obviously, we did have a little bit of comedic back and forth between them, which was pretty awesome. One thing about that conversation that was the most interesting was when they were talking about the location on the map. Obviously, Joel asked the guy to point a location on the map. He also asked the same thing from the wife and said, "Your answer better be the same." So it was basically a way for Joel to get the right information out of these people, because if they point to the same place, then it's basically accurate. If not, then one of them is lying. Unless they are really smart and have thought about it through and they both point to the same wrong location. But this is pretty awesome because it's a direct callback to something that we actually saw in part 1 of the game, but also part 2 of the game as well. In part 1, we did have, during the Lakeside Resort chapter of the game, Joel used the same tactic to interrogate the people that were there in order to find out where Ellie was. We're obviously going to see this later on in Season 1. This is going to be something that they come back to, like the scene that we saw in this episode is going to be referred back to, or at least it's going to be some sort of an Easter egg for later. And I think that what they're going to really focus on is the complete opposite reactions and tactics from Joel. Because this time around, he was pretty friendly. He was pretty chill with the elderly that he was interrogating. As we will see later, and based on what happened on the game, this was way different in the game and more violent when it happened between him and the Lakeside Resort gang. In fact, later on, in part 2 specifically, Ellie uses this tactic. So as we can see, this is something that is directly going to link to something that's probably going to come up in a few episodes in Season 1, but also it's something that could be called back to or an Easter egg for Season 2 of the game. Now, there was another thing that directly links to something that happened in part 2 of the video game, a pretty awesome and huge Easter egg. We had a scene where Joel was actually talking about some farmland. This was his safe haven in a way, or some place that he wishes he would be at if everything goes well. Now, what's very interesting is that he's talking to Ellie about this, and we do know at the end of part 2 of the game, Ellie ends up being at a farmhouse. She lives there with her girlfriend or wife, Dina. We'll come back to Dina in just a little bit, but what is interesting is that in the game, they didn't really mention how Ellie found this place or anything like that, at least not from my recollection. But in the TV adaptation, this could be set up for that. Like when Ellie ends up being in that location later on, she is probably going to think about this conversation, or we might get a big reveal about this being the same farmland that Joel was talking about earlier. So that's definitely super interesting. Now, speaking of Dina, who I mentioned, there was something that we saw in this episode, Season 1, Episode 6, which was very, very interesting. I did a separate video on it, but Dina might have actually made a cameo. when Joel and Ellie go to visit Tommy at Jackson, we have a scene where Ellie is looking at a girl that's staring at her. She actually mentions that maybe she should teach her some manners. Now, I'll come back to that in a bit, but this girl is most likely Dina. So this is most likely Dina's first appearance in the TV show adaptation, which is super awesome. I dive deeper into that on a separate video, so if you're interested, go check it out. But Ellie saying she should teach her some manners. From what I remember, there was a lot of very interesting back and forth between Dina and Ellie about that type of thing, like having manners and that sort of thing. So I wonder if this is also something that's gonna be used as a callback or an Easter egg later on. So we're gonna have to wait and find out. But this was super cool, and I'm definitely super intrigued to see whether we're gonna see any other types of cameos like this when it comes to characters that we're gonna meet later in the story, specifically characters that appear in part 2 of the video game. And to be more direct, I'm specifically talking about characters like maybe Jesse or Abby or someone like that. I think when we get near the end of the story in season 1, we definitely need to pay attention to characters in the background that might look like Abby, because I do have a feeling that she's gonna pop up. I think that she's gonna make a cameo. She might be in the background, she might not say anything like here, but she'll be there. I have a feeling that that's gonna happen. But just to continue the conversation about Dina, we did see the two of them dance in part 2 in what appeared to be some sort of a dancing hall or a bar or something, which is interesting because that could be this exact bar where they were at when Dina made her first appearance. Now, one thing that I actually just noticed is that even in this scene, we do see Dina. Look at the left hand side, you do see Dina standing in the corner on the bottom left. So that's definitely super interesting. I just noticed that. But the other thing I want to talk about is the scene between Joel and Ellie, the sharpshooting scene when they were using the sniper rifle from Tommy. Now, obviously, Tommy gave Joel this gun, and I'll explain why that's important in just a minute. But this is super cool because this happened in the game in part 2, but it wasn't between Joel and Ellie, it was between Tommy and Ellie, which is super cool. And obviously, we do know that Tommy is a good shooter. We know that he is pretty accurate with his shots. Joel even mentioned that killing infected from afar is no problem for someone like Tommy, which is cool. But obviously, since Tommy gave Joel this gun, this sniper rifle, I'm pretty sure that things are gonna play out in a very interesting and emotional way when it comes to later on, when we get to a point where the sniper rifle comes back to Tommy, to its rightful owner, and we might even see that same scene with Ellie and Tommy, just like what we saw in part 2 of the game. But obviously, something will be missing. You might have figured it out already. If you've played the game, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But it's going to be interesting to see how that whole thing comes together. But that's pretty much everything I wanted to go through in this video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, smash the like button, subscribe to join our community, and press the bell to be notified when I upload on the channel. That's it for this video. See you next time for another super video.